China is undoubtedly the second strongest country in the world right now. But what if they were number one? Although the idea of China as the most powerful country in the world has been a concern of Western powers for most of the 21st century, with them catching up on many areas economically and technologically pretty rapidly, the chances of it actually happening are, in my opinion, pretty slim, given their impending population collapse among other things. But what if they were to become the global police and influence the entire world? Well, today, I'm going to most likely fail trying to hypothesize how this would look. In our current state of international relations and great power politics, there is a multipolar landscape. That is, there are three great political superpowers: USA, China, and Russia. America is the most powerful superpower, China is second, and Russia is a distant third, slowly drifting even further away now. Although Russia pales in comparison to the other superpowers in nearly every domain, it retains one of the largest nuclear weapons arsenals in the world, and as long as they have those, they will maintain superpower status. This is of course very different from the world of bipolarity we had during the Cold War, where we had just the Soviet Union and Union states, who were relatively evenly matched as well. Then from 1991 until the latter 2010s, we lived in a unipolar world. China was only becoming a great power over this period, and after the USSR collapsed, Russia was a failed state. They were by no means a great political power. The United States, as the singular great political power, was free to do what they wanted, like expand NATO all across Europe and invade nations like Iraq and Afghanistan with no repercussions from other superpowers. Now, however, things are different. We live in a multipolar landscape, where three superpowers exist, along with two major conflicts. Unlike just the one in the Cold War, the war in Ukraine constitutes a US-Russia conflict, and the US-China conflict is based upon Taiwan. This is an unprecedented level of instability to have a multipolar world with multiple conflicts between superpowers. It's a highly problematic scenario for the US, as they must contend with two separate superpower conflicts on different sides of the globe. This is where things start to get hypothetical. Now imagine that the West were to win the war in the Ukraine and humiliate Russia and Putin. This pushes Russia into the arms of the Chinese, as Putin would have to fully fortify the Russia-China alliance for the sake of Russia's revival. This would be step one of China's rise to dominance. Then the world will turn its eyes to Taiwan, where if China invades and is able to occupy the island, America will have, for all intents and purposes, lost an essential part of the Eastern Hemisphere, and the balance of power would change fundamentally. It would most likely require an amphibious invasion across the Taiwan Strait for China to take Taiwan, maybe the hardest form of warfare to succeed in. Now, before you stop me, I will stop myself, as I know how wildly improbable this is. I mean, I literally even made a video about how the war would work. But for the sake of this video, let's assume China is successful in ousting US influence and consolidating power in Taiwan. Suddenly, this rising superpower is no longer just a regional hegemon, but it has a real case for being the global hegemon in the realm of great power politics. China would start to control the entire Western Pacific, and US allies like Australia, Philippines, South Korea, and Japan would be firmly within the orbit of a new and unchallenged superpower, making US influence in the region less than adequate. In fact, this situation would potentially force these US allies to cozy up to China, if not authentically, then at least superficially. Otherwise, a similar scenario as we have seen with Ukraine trying to join NATO could play out. Ukraine is a country in Russia's orbit, in fact on their very border, and they tried to reject what their local superpower wanted, which was either a pro-Russia or neutral stance. If you anger your local superpower by aligning with a rival superpower, which in this case was the US/NATO, your regional hegemon will not like it, and may invade if they feel the situation poses an existential security risk. So the US allies in East Asia and the Pacific would now need to think twice about their alliance with the Americans, because this type of alliance could jeopardize their sovereignty and their people's safety. By no means would this happen quickly. Superpower timescales can last decades or more, as we know, but there is a domino effect that's difficult to stop once set in motion. As the US loses strategic positions in the East, their grip on the worldwide geopolitical landscape loosens quickly. Many actually believe that US involvement in Ukraine can lead to this exact scenario, where China takes Taiwan and usurps the US as global hegemon, mainly due to the Americans overextending themselves with two large-scale superpower conflicts at the same time. Not only is this plausible, but as the Ukraine conflict seems to be heading towards an extended stalemate that will remain a frozen conflict for many years to come, the requirement of a NATO military presence there is unavoidable. We may be seeing the rise of the new global hegemon as we speak, much sooner than some expected. So what if this does happen? What if the US beats Russia in Ukraine but loses Taiwan and the Eastern Hemisphere in the process? What does a world look like where China is the dominant political power? Well, the next phase of a China-dominated world from a military perspective involves China aggressively dominating the Eastern Hemisphere. And if you'd like to see what this would look like, or better yet, take part in some military campaigns of your own, well then let me introduce you to War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. Take command of over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships of 10 major nations, ranging from biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and main battle tanks of today. And my favorite part of all of this is just how accessible it is. You don't need a $1,000 setup to enjoy the game fully. Play for free on Xbox, PlayStation, or PC. Join the worldwide community of over 70 million players in epic PvP battles today. Available for a limited time only, so don't miss it. Sign up using my link in the video description below. So, China will most likely begin rolling back US influence in countries such as South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, etc., creating their own version of the Monroe Doctrine. As for what this doctrine is, well, it's a law implemented by US President James Monroe in 1820. The law states that no foreign power can form a military alliance with any country in the Western Hemisphere. This means that if a country like France or Spain at the time, or like Russia or China in recent years, tried to gain influence in a Latin American nation, it would trigger the Monroe Doctrine, causing America to invade that country and prevent the foreign influence. This doctrine has really shaped US foreign policy in the region for over 2 centuries. Especially during the 20th century, America ruthlessly staged regime changes and coups all around the countries of South and Central America, in addition to the Caribbean. During this period known as the Banana Wars, the US often overthrew leaders that were democratically elected in order to protect their economic interests in these countries. Fruit, and more specifically bananas, hence the name Banana Wars, were a key natural resource for these nations. But American companies like United Fruit Company were exploiting these resources for themselves, and they didn't want that to change. So the Monroe Doctrine was the foundation on which the US could protect their own economic interests in their region, as well as deter foreign influences encroaching on their territory. The reason this is important is that a ruthless regional hegemon must implement a similar type of law so as to dominate their region similarly. As America already has a military presence in allied countries of East Asia, it may look different, but China will establish a policy of the same kind, gradually pushing the United States, whether through traditional warfare or coups, out of South Korea, Japan, and other key strategic areas. Given America's defeat in Taiwan, they will have a depleted naval presence as China now owns the South China Sea and other bodies of water that the USA previously marshaled in the region. This will limit America's capabilities when it comes to helping protect their Asian allies. And although in the real world they most likely would, let's assume that America won't be capable of protecting these Western allies in the long run. In this context, America's military influence, while immense, would be contained in the Western Hemisphere. While China controls the Eastern Hemisphere, it will also reinforce its economic ties to Africa and the developing world. As we've already seen in the present day, African nations have begun to swing allegiances toward China due to investment schemes like the Belt Road Initiative, or BRI for short, and because of consistent exploitation by Western colonial powers. The groundwork has already been laid for China to establish an expansive presence throughout Africa, which leaves the US with shrinking intelligence and military capabilities anywhere outside of Europe and the Americas. Local conflicts will become very common. As one global hegemon is replaced by another, desperation sets in and proxy wars will pop up all throughout the world, each one constituting a new security risk for each superpower. From a strategic standpoint, a world where China is the leading military superpower will allow them to throttle the US economically, cutting off their most important trade channels and supply chains. Of course, this is a very aggressive tactic, but given the US capabilities of recovery, an offensive approach is the safest strategy for this new global leader, within reason of course. Backing the US into a corner could provoke nuclear warfare, but mutually assured destruction should prevent this. On a smaller scale, countries like Japan and South Korea have the raw materials and production mechanisms in place to produce nuclear weapons. This makes them particularly problematic regional enemies for China, specifically in relation to nuclear brinkmanship. Still, China's rise is closely tied to the revenge they seek for the century of humiliation, the period from roughly the mid-19th to the mid-20th century, where they were dominated by Western powers and the Japanese Empire. A world dominated by China's century of humiliation ideology would see stark revenge taken on enemies of the past. It's not a foreign policy governed by fear, but of revenge. Just as the Japanese did to them during World War II, a brutal occupation could be expected in Japan especially. When a superpower's rise is predicated on retribution for past grievances, like with Nazi Germany, it can lead to intense geopolitical aggression. The only thing going for them is that this happened so long ago that maybe China would let go of it. Maybe. That brings us to the economic dominance of China in their new leading position. We already know that China is an economic superpower today. While still functioning as a totalitarian society, the CCP's embrace of capitalism has enriched the nation tremendously. They are already the manufacturing hub of the globe, constituting over a quarter of the global manufacturing market. This will most likely continue. The key chess piece in this new world is Taiwan. Since Taiwan currently accounts for 50% of the global market of semiconductor manufacturing, and China is currently fifth in that domain, the new Chinese empire with control of Taiwan will own the semiconductor processing industry. They will also control South Korea and Japan, numbers 2 and 3 on that list. While America's semiconductor manufacturing industry is fourth in the world, they will be no match for the other top 4 producers combined, allowing China to dominate the trillion-dollar industry undisputedly, while severely limiting America's access to the crucial technologies on which our world is now built. Furthermore, China's long-term investment initiatives in Africa and their military control of the continent will allow them to dominate crucial raw materials like cobalt and chromium through their mines in the Congo and elsewhere, further cutting off the Americans from the necessary material needed to upscale their own semiconductor industry. A key economic concern for China, and perhaps the most pressing issue for the survival of China, is their demographics problem. As their population of nearly 1.5 billion has faced plummeting birth rates, they have been pegged by economists worldwide for a collapse of epic proportions. With Chinese birth rates falling to record lows of 6.7 per 1,000 in 2022, after being as high as 14.7 in previous years, the gradual decrease of able-bodied adults available for the workforce, such as for jobs in their immense manufacturing industry, is potentially catastrophic. Once a country falls behind the birth rate curve for a stable population, it is rarely rectifiable. Therefore, they will soon reach an unsustainable ratio of elderly citizens to working adults, leading to a societal collapse. Luckily, in this new world where they dominate the Eastern Hemisphere, China can function as the USSR did during the Cold War, using satellite states as manufacturing hubs, utilizing those foreign populations to satisfy the labor force shortages in their economy. Now, this was not easy for the Soviets, and led to several large-scale famines. That is always an issue with this model, as well as the fact that surrounding countries like South Korea and Japan face similar demographic issues to China. But that being said, the blueprint is there for them to escape the demographic trap in a world where they are the #1 superpower, and the autocratic control of the Eastern Hemisphere may just be the only thing that allows them to do so. Now that their military and strategic position is unparalleled in addition to their economic prowess being amplified, we will look at one more stratum of global politics where they can take control and finalize their place as international hegemon. That would be the socio-political dimension, where soft power and ideological dominance across the globe encourages cooperation and discourages confrontation. Just as every superpower does once on top, spreading the ideologies and culture of your nation is essential for garnering control over foreign nations. By projecting an image of dominance and through hard power, China can control much of what they need to, but to instill your cultural norms, arts, and social conventions in the collective consciousness of other populations, you encourage support for your decisions on a deeper level than simply fear. Italy, for example, projects soft power through their cultural artifacts like cuisine, architecture, religious iconography, and ancient Roman history. These evoke positive connotations of their country amongst foreigners. The Soviets did the same with their art and system of governance in Central Asia and Eastern Europe. And of course, America has done this in the West for nearly a century. As China establishes control, they will need to develop their entertainment sector to export to the world, because currently countries like South Korea with their K-pop and Japan with their anime are cultural beasts in the region, not China. We've already seen the effects of Chinese soft power taking place today. US companies like Blizzard, Apple, Disney, and sports leagues like the NBA have essentially banned criticisms of China amongst their employees and business affiliates, primarily because the Chinese market has become so crucial for their revenue and business strategies. We see similar effects taking place in countries like Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria, where Chinese influence has led to positive ratings of the country by the local populations. Their college education, IT industry, and military are the most admired elements by outsiders. Through developing the crucial entertainment sector of the soft power dimension, they will project dominance on all levels. This will help them at least reduce the issue of Western sympathizers over time, further placing them in the driver's seat in the great power politics race. America garnered unprecedented global support, particularly in the 20th century, due to their entertainment exports from Hollywood and the music industry, even while they were staging coups d'etats and pillaging countries' natural resources. The positive views of America have gone through ups and downs according to research data, with record lows coming during the War on Terror years, and now rising again this past decade. China can follow the American blueprint for soft power dominance, Again, easier said than done, but this would have to be a reality in a world run by China, where countries in Africa and the Eastern Hemisphere consume Chinese entertainment, social media content, food, and literature more than the Western equivalents. This would be a noticeable shift, quite different than the world we live in today. But Chinese culture and soft power isn't the only socio-political change in this new world. The political conventions of China would need to be exported. Just as America spent decades exporting the ethos of pro-Western liberal democracies, China will export their autocracy and socialist market economy. Although China's CCP is a capitalist powerhouse, and different titles like authoritarian capitalism or state capitalism can be used to describe their economy because there is a coexistence of entrepreneurs and capitalists with collective enterprise, the state still controls the assets at the end of the day, and the CCP maintains that China is not a capitalist state themselves. Regardless, the socialist market economy, technocratic government, whatever term you prefer really, isn't a democracy or a full-fledged capitalist state. Either way, they see their model as superior, as all superpowers do, and their dedication to it has led them to this point. So they will attempt to encourage similar market economies with centralized state control across the region. In doing so, a conglomerate of this governance across many nations can be adopted in which China's CCP is the head of a region-wide Chinese governance model. An autocratic state leading global politics has the potential to establish a USSR-style entity in a world where America can't stop them. As they develop tools like facial recognition technology and social credit score systems, large-scale autocratic governance becomes more feasible and allows the Chinese to establish a type of political control that has never been achieved. It could lead to social harmony and increased prosperity for all, or it could lead us down a path of restricted freedom and revolution followed by anarchy. There is no way anybody could know. The nightmare stories people hear about CCP surveillance or imprisonment of government critics aren't desirable, but this form of governance may allow China to make statewide or region-wide decisions with no obstacles like consensus of voters or majority support in the way. They can simply enact the economic, political, or military policies that they see fit, and implement them without pushback. Don't forget that CCP propaganda would certainly be disseminated throughout the Eastern Hemisphere, depicting China's benevolence and supremacy, reinforcing their goals on the ground. These tactics are reminiscent of how China reintegrated Hong Kong and aggressively stomped out Western influence. It also evokes thoughts of the BRI and the technological infrastructure Chinese companies like Huawei, ZTE, and China Telecom are implementing throughout Africa. This digital Silk Road, where fiber optic cables link various host nations, is not only a soft power tool of China, but it is a practical development that can help them export their technocratic control. In some places like Zimbabwe, Singapore, and parts of Eurasia, smart cities built on AI facial recognition technology are already being established by companies like Yitu and CloudWalk, allowing China to install their domestic surveillance infrastructure around the globe. As this technological infrastructure will be invariably linked back to China through these companies, their surveillance capabilities are already expanding tremendously, and this model can be expanded further in their new era of dominance. Otherwise, the next option is that they allow domestic control to be handled by local powers in places like South Korea or Japan to avoid degrading public opinion of their rule. But this option runs the risk of local powers unifying against them with free rein to control their populations. To avoid democratic aspirations, autocratic control is a safer bet, evidenced by the inability of democracy to develop in places like North Korea and China over the last few decades. They may not conduct an autocratic model abroad as they do domestically, but ruling with an iron fist by exporting their techno-surveillance-based autocratic system puts the ball in their court when it comes to perpetuating their dominance. During the 20th century, America aggressively overthrew fledgling communist countries in their region in order to establish democracy as the status quo in Western minds. And one would expect China to do the same to burgeoning democratic movements in the East once they are in control. Either way, one thing that's for sure is that when a global hegemon believes in their model of governance, they don't hesitate to impose it on the rest of the world. And China is no exception to this rule in their new world. So what does this world offer for the West? Well, clearly a much more limited landscape of natural resources and socio-political influence. Long gone is the era of American hegemony now. The combination of offshoring for decades crippled their ability to restart their economy from a more insulated perspective when it was necessary. Without the liberalized markets and trade partnerships of the past benefiting them, they can't project dominance like before. The failure to combat China's spreading of military control and economic influence in crucial regions related to raw materials and natural resources has left them unable to contend with the new hegemon as a peer, although still capable of surviving and remaining a powerful player. Their cultural exports are still relevant in Europe and English-speaking parts of Africa, but in Chinese-controlled African countries, this would be gradually stomped out by a zero-tolerance policy on Western sympathizing. The new global order would be far less connected. This is the same phenomenon of deglobalization we are experiencing now after 70 years of America marshalling the seas of global trade and commerce, just accelerated by a handful of generations. As countries realized the fragility of supply chains, it has forced larger nations to restructure their trade strategies and increase local manufacturing of goods across all sectors, while relying less on foreign imports from other regions of the world. The animosity between the US and China would only speed up this fracturing of global trade and economics, leaving the world more divided and compartmentalized than ever before. At this point, America has fallen firmly into the great power trap that international relations scholars have been warning about for decades. The rising hegemon has replaced its rival through warfare, soft power, and economic abundance to become the international hegemon. And they won't be replaced until another great power trap comes for them. So it goes. The chess match of power politics, always anarchic and never stable. Thank you for watching. And again, thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play it for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox now by using my link in the video description below. See you in the next one.